Melbourne has been under 6 different lockdowns since March of 2020, totaling more than 260 days. That's believed to be the longest any city has been under lockdown. Starting Friday, there will be no more curfews or travel limits in Melbourne. Australia's vaccination effort got off to a slow start, but in Melbourne and surrounding area, the vaccination rate is now 70%.
To get the jab. All these workers and many, many more directly interact with members of the public. That means you are frontline workers in our economy. That means you must be vaccinated. Of course, there can be exemptions, but these are extremely narrow and must be backed up with medical evidence. Simply not wanting the vaccine is not a reason. Simply not wanting the vaccine is not a reason. Not a reason. And a failure to comply with the direction is a $5,000 fine. You have 30 days. That is the deadline. The direction includes a provision mandating booster shots as needed for these same workers in the future. It also allows employers to request proof of vaccination and requires them to keep a register of their staff's vaccination status. We want this to be as easy as possible for you. Easy.
As easy as getting vaccinated.
now it seems clear to me that we are facing a siege on both the social and religious front. The so-called emergency has been utilized as a false pretext to impose the Green Pass in many nations of the world in a simultaneous and coordinated way. At the same time, on the other front, not only do the ecclesiastical authorities not condemn in the least the abuse of power by those who govern public affairs, but they support them in this wicked plan and go so far as to condemn those who do not accept being subjected to with an experiment that does not impart any immunity, to say nothing of the moral implications related to the presence of genetic material derived from aborted fetuses, a more than sufficient reason to refuse. We are at war, a war that is not openly declared, that is not fought with conventional weapons, in which there are aggressors and aggressees, executioners and victims, a war in which violence is used in ostensibly legal forms in order to violate the rights of citizens as well as believers.
Hi.
You have a mask?
No, I don't.
I can give you one.
You can give me one?
I can give you one.
Why do
I need you to wear a mask.
So you can hand me a mask,
I can hand you one, yeah.
but you can't hand me the drink without a mask?
You've got to wear a mask.
How does that make any sense?
That's what I just need you to wear a mask. Do you mind?
Well, if you can hand me a mask, why can't you just hand me the drink?
I can hand you the mask.
Welcome everybody to Armor of Truth Live. What is this? Number 143. It's good to have you here with us today, folks. Let me get this audio right. Hope you enjoyed that opening salvo, that opening clip there. It's worldwide. Things are happening. The media is not really reporting on this. It's out there, and we can't say a whole lot about it over here on this platform. So we do encourage you to join us on our website, armoroftruth.net. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, today, we're embarking on quite a journey. We're going down a path today that will be edifying, as it should always be. And we're going to talk about everything from the supply chain breakdown to a breakaway civilization. We're touching them all today. This is a grand slam. All right, so thank you for being with us today. It's good to see all of you out there in the live chat once again. We do have a poll question for you today that I'd love for you to participate in if you would. Let me update that and make sure we've got all the latest information, all the latest votes in here. Also, a way to get your thoughts onto the show is to give us a comment over here on the poll question. Likewise, you can address Summer in the live chat. And toward the end of the show, if there's time, if we're not running too long, I'll take those questions and field them, and we'll deal with those at the end. So let's look at this poll question before we get started in this interesting deep dive that we've got for you today. The question is, what, if any, shortages are you experiencing in your area right now? All right, so 53 voted so far, and I got the poll up a little bit late today, so that's a pretty good turnout so far. I invite you to please go over and vote in this poll. The link is in the live chat. It's pinned to the top of the live chat. Otherwise, you can navigate to the community tab on this YouTube channel. That is the Brad from Carolina YouTube channel. And vote. It's the top post. Now, so far here, what shortages are you experiencing in your area? The categories so far: food, gas, toilet tissue, because it seemed to be such an issue in the beginning of 2020, or all of the above, or none of the above. Very interesting, isn't it? Look at the result here. All we hear about are supply chain interruptions and shortages. Maybe it hasn't quite hit yet, but there are supply chain issues. It's just it's sporadic at the moment. All right, so none of the above. So far, the overwhelming majority here is almost 70% of you say you haven't experienced any of these shortages so far. The biggest shortage that people are experiencing, if any, is food shortages. Seeing shelves that are empty or lacking in options. Got a lot of comments here. We probably won't be able to get to all the comments. We'll check back with these. Let me grab a couple of them right now. I usually just mark it with a heart there to show that I've read it already, but I do appreciate your comments very much. Clayton says, I'm not noticing a food shortage per se, but I am noticing a parts and components shortage as my stove recently quit working correctly, and it took weeks to fix because of delays with shipping. Same thing happened in my family. My mother was trying to have a refrigerator fixed, and it took about 2 months to get a simple part in. My car recently, took my car was in the shop for 3 months. Now, I'm not sure if that was necessarily only because of shipping delays, but it was a factor. On Fire Foley says there's food, but selection is very limited. Certain extremely processed stuff. TP, toilet tissue, is hit or miss. Health food stores are low. There was no premium gas the other day. And he says, thank you to Brad and Summer for all you guys do. God is good. Thank you very much for that. JC Brown says, I'm noticing the lack of option on the shelves. Shelves appear full, however, they are full of a lot of the same thing. Interesting. So that seems to be a trend so far. Miss Kelly Henson says, although I picked none, I have seen bare shelves in one grocery store. It was paper plates. Styrofoam were everywhere, but paper plates were non-existent. Paper products. Water was the second thing I noticed was bare on the shelves. Maybe they just hadn't stocked the shelves yet at that time. Everything seems to be back to normal now, Kelly says. Well, I would keep your eyes open because things are going to get a little more difficult as we move forward in the next few weeks. Lissa G says, as of today, we noticed bacon is getting low and toilet paper is slim pickings in the Finger Lakes, New York region. The butcher at Save-A-Lot said it's about to get a lot worse. I appreciate these polls and hope you do them regularly so we can help each other stay ahead of the game as much as possible. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm happy to hear that you find it useful, and we certainly will. As long as we're allowed to be on here on this platform, we will come to you live on YouTube as much as possible. But let's keep in mind now, we're going to have our home is armoroftruth.net. I'll show you some more about that in a minute because I have a link to share with you over there. Now, very quickly, in my introduction today, I want to share with you, well, right now we're going to go over to armoroftruth.net, and I want to show you this. Summer has recently posted this article. All the articles you see at the top of the page, that is Summer's work. She's the one who goes out and collects articles for what we call the Culture Vault. If you scroll down on our homepage, you can see I've already clicked on the link. So if you go to the homepage anyway, on our homepage, at the top you'll find the latest posting, whether it's my blog or something Summer has posted in the Culture Vault. If you scroll down here, you can see, there you go, right there. You can find the Culture Vault, and that is where you find articles, research articles, things that are relevant for what we're dealing with right now. All right, and also she is very, very diligent to keep good news in there. As much good news as there is news about what's going on in the world that might be bad. All right, here's some Bible study series links if you want to check those out. And here's the video we did Friday night live from the Space Ranch, our uncensored AoT True Normal show number 9. We dealt with mandatory procedures and how to think about them biblically. We went into it very deeply. I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to check that show out. We shared some stories, some religious exemption requests from viewers, and one viewer in particular who is dealing with who has who is having to deal with this in a way that is very instructive, and I'd love for you to check it out. So if you check on this article anyway, I wanted to come here, and Summer will be glad to share that link with you in the live chat. But what we're looking at here is class action lawsuit. Many top legal experts believe that Biden's September 9th executive order was patently illegal. And now it's being challenged. And we're talking about mandates. It's being challenged by a massive class action suit that is initially asking for a restraining order to be put on hold the November 22 deadline for all of the military, civilian employees, and affiliated contractors to receive this medical treatment that we talk about, that we have to be careful saying. We all know what we're talking about here. All right, so if you go to this link on our website, we'll have here's the article from Technocracy News. Service members from all 5 branches of the U.S. military, federal employees, and federal civilian contractors have joined in a class action lawsuit against the DoD over its mandates. 24 plaintiffs are facing a deadline to receive theirs, and they say it violates their sincerely held religious beliefs and have been refused any religious exemption or accommodation, according to Liberty Counsel, the Christian legal firm that filed the lawsuit. Now, of course, Jeff Durbin over at Apologia Studios, Apologia Church, has been doing a great job in ministering to and speaking for specifically Navy SEALs who are in this situation and who simply think this is out of line. All right, so you might want to check out some of his work. So the lawsuit that was filed in U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Florida lists the President, lists the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Homeland Security as defendants. The plaintiffs are asking the court to issue a temporary restraining order to prevent these mandates from taking effect, and ultimately issue an injunction to prevent the Pentagon from enforcing the Biden administration's mandates. All right, so the Navy and Marine Corps have a deadline of November 28 for their active duty service members. Reservists have until December 28th. For the Army and the Air Force, the deadlines for active duty, December 15th and November 12th, respectively. Deadlines for National Guard Reserve members are June 30th of next year and December 2nd, 2021, respectively. U.S. Coast Guard members have until November 22nd to be fully treated. Now, it says here, plaintiffs have demonstrated their commitments to the United States Constitution and the nation's future comfort, security, and prosperity. This court should demand that the nation return the favor, telling plaintiffs they must accept or receive, make that a little larger for you, that they must accept or receive a treatment that they oppose according to their sincerely held religious beliefs, or face court-martial, dishonorable discharge, or other life-altering disciplinary measures, disgraces the sacrifices that these heroes have made. They say, the attorneys say, that this is needed now to prevent immediate and irreparable injury to our armed forces. And, of course, the Pentagon comment was simply, we do not comment on ongoing litigation. Biden administration has no authority to require such a thing for military, federal employees, or civil contractors for that matter. nor can the administration pretend that Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the First Amendment do not apply to its unlawful mandates. This is the quote from Liberty Counsel founder and chairman Matt Staver. It says the commander-in-chief must end the shameful treatment and abuse of our brave military heroes. Forcing these treatments without consent or consideration for their sincere religious beliefs is illegal. White House officials, of course, did not immediately respond to a request for comment. All right. And the article, actually, the full article, you can find at the Epoch Times. All right. So I wanted to share that with you because in our opening today, because there's a development. That is a development in this ongoing issue. Of course, here on this channel, we're on YouTube. We're not telling you what to do. We're not making any claims about safety or effectiveness. That's not our job. What we do advocate for is privacy and freedom of choice. Don't need to go any further than that. What you decide to do is up to you, and what you decide to do ought to be private. It always has been and still should be. Okay. So that was a development over the past couple of days I wanted to share with you as we got started today. But moving on into our stories for today. Supply chain. Why? How does it work? Is it true that it's been interrupted? How do we think about it? What do we know about the supply chain? Let's learn something today. By the way, if you like these, you can find one of these. There are links in the description for, we have some Armor of Truth t-shirts and some things like this, and a little bit of merch. It helps us out. If you want to help support us that way, you can do that. It all goes to the same place. So are we looking at the perfect storm? You often hear that. You hear that from both sides. Is it the perfect storm? Now, to say it's the perfect storm would be to say that it's all organic, that it all, like a storm, that it all just happened naturally. Well, we know that today, not even all storms happen naturally. Global pandemic, global supply chain breakdown, global food shortage, global lockdowns, global protests about lockdowns, governments aligning with one another under the banner of safety, saying, trust us. This is in your best interest. We just need 2 weeks to get the situation under control. We're the government. We're here to help you. Trust us. Now, if you were extremely optimistic about all this, you might say that this is just mismanagement of a crisis. If you were extremely cynical, you'd say this is a masterful plan to call and enslave humanity. You might not be all that cynical if that was your view, but where do you find yourself on that paradigm? Does it look like mismanagement or does it look like a devious plan? Personally, since this is my opinion segment, I believe the truth is somewhere in the middle. But I believe it's much closer to devious plan scenario than anyone who's watching the mainstream news wants to admit. Now, as I've said here many times, I'm unlike most folks, on YouTube who might call themselves truthers or part of this movement anyway. I don't really give global bankers and the controllers, the world bankers and governments, I don't give them as much credit as much of the community does. However, the time for such optimism as thinking that these powers are in any way working for the good of humanity, well, that's long past. That ship has sailed, to stay on theme. There most certainly is a global order, and its designs for how the world should look and how it should function, well, it's more than clear. What we're seeing happen right now before our eyes is an attempted global takeover to fundamentally change currency, trade, the way people work, where people work, the way people live, human reproduction, humanity itself possibly. And in their words, the goal is to save the earth from human beings, to end poverty and generally level the playing field for all of Earth's inhabitants. Now, that's how it's billed anyway, as for the greater good. This is all it's in your best interest. Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, that's what we're looking at. Ultimately, that's the engine pushing this down the line. The new progressive form of environmentalism, politics, economy, social order. Let's not forget peace and safety. So, how's it going so far? We are nearly 30 years into the plan that was established at the Rio Summit by more than 160 countries back in 1992. Now, if you're old enough, take your mind back. Just take your mind back to pre-90s lifestyle, or even in the 90s. What were your biggest concerns back then? Who was the boogeyman back in the 90s? As we moved through the early to the mid to the late 90s, who was the boogeyman? Do you remember the main boogeyman back then? Well, folks, a lot has changed in 30 years. The boogeyman back then, or the enemy, that was threatening your freedom, that constant perceived outside force that's always necessary to keep one group in power. Well, back then it was just some evil man, whoever it might be. It was an evil man in a faraway place that needed to be dealt with. Or if you go back into the 80s, it was the evil empire of the Soviet Union and the imminent threat of nuclear annihilation. So if you're old enough, just take your mind back to the good old days, when all we had to worry about was the threat of nuclear annihilation. Things have changed. Things have changed. Today, the boogeyman now is you. Humanity is the threat, and the survival of the planet is what's at stake, according to the narrative. But is that threat real? Is that true? How can we know? Does it even matter? What could possibly be done to recover the world from a force so powerful that it's able to convince people in the freest land ever known on earth to tremble in fear and submit to giving up the most essential of liberties over an unseen threat? Why does it seem that so few challenge anything that comes down from the secular god of government today? And make no mistake, government has ensconced itself as God, right? And why do we say that? Because, whenever God is rejected, government takes the position of absolute authority. Why are so few able to discern the obvious, outright, and demonstrably false tales and manipulation that spew forth from the sewer that we call mainstream media today? And I'm not going to let alternative media off the hook either. It's just as guilty. But I'm not looking to make any enemies today from that camp. So there's plenty of time for that another day. So stay tuned. Pundits and experts, in other words, technocrats and mindless shills, are saying the supply chain problems could last well into 2022 and perhaps even through next year and into 2023. Are you prepared? Food, water, protection. It's smart to be ready. Especially if you're an American who has never dealt with actual hunger, actual lack, actual scarcity. Scarcity happens to be the wave that's currently breaking on us right now. Austerity measures. It's going to hurt some people more than it does others. And don't forget, just around the corner, climate lockdowns to mitigate the damage that you're infringing upon the earth. Those are coming. Those are coming next. The goal of the agenda for the 21st century has always been to limit your movement, to limit your ability and rights to own anything, and to keep you neatly confined in the hive. And because truth itself and the ideology of absolute truth, Christianity, the Christian worldview, is the only real obstacle to this communitarian utopia of docile, drone-like human beings, well then it must be done away with. Christianity will be dealt with eventually. Well, they'll attempt to anyway. So be prepared for hard times. Definitely. This is the time to be smart. But more than that, just to understand this: if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, a Christian in the purest sense of the term, persecution is coming for you. This is not the time to be a free agent Christian. You're going to need community. Christians of the early church were beautiful, shining examples of how a fellowship and community will be your best source of support, will be your comfort, and will be your safety for that which is no doubt coming our way. Keep in mind, God is sovereign, and the Lord will grow His church. All right, this is not all about you and me. It's not all about our comfort and prosperity. It's about His will. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you as though something strange were happening to you. Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in Him, but also suffer for His sake. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, says Jesus. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And it won't be according to your power, it will be His. Because it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will for you to suffer, than it is to suffer for doing evil, of course. More than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. Let us deny ourselves and take up His cross and follow Him. For whoever would save his life, or whoever would lose his life, whoever would save his life would lose his life. But whoever loses his life for my sake, says Jesus, will find his life. The gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. And you can tell just by these half dozen or so verses, the gate is narrow. Because the Christianity you hear being preached in the world today, widely, it's not the gospel. It's something else. Now, what is causing global goods shortage, global shortages? Well, I've got some clips to share with you and some commentary. We're going to get to the bottom of this. I want you to, my research for this show was, I want to understand a little bit how supply chain works. How does it work globally? You know, it is a global economy now. So how does a supply chain work? How do goods get from a manufacturer to the consumer? What are the steps in between? What could break down? What sort of systems are in place to ensure that these breakdowns don't happen? Are there any? How easy would it be for one player, for one link in the chain to suddenly decide that it wants to disrupt the world? So we'll start here with a little clip, about a minute here from Al Jazeera. Now I know what you're saying, Al Jazeera. Let's listen to what the mainstream narrative is telling us. All right.
And consumers, analysts are blaming what they call a perfect storm of problems. Dozens of cargo ships are stuck off the coast of Southern California in the US. They're waiting to unload containers at ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach that handle almost half of America's imports. That backlog is pushing up prices. Shops are warning of empty shelves ahead of Thanksgiving and Christmas. US President Joe Biden says the ports will now work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Delivery companies and major retailers are also working overtime.
This is across-the-board commitment to going to 24/7. This is a big first step in speeding up the movement of materials and goods through our supply chain. But now we need the rest of the private sector chain to step up as well. Our goal is not only to get through this immediate bottleneck, but to address the long-standing weaknesses in our transportation supply chain that this pandemic has exposed.
Okay, so the idea, what you heard there, what we need to do is to get everyone working 24/7. Well, you're going to hear in just a minute, the ports have always worked 24/7. So it's just empty rhetoric. We need to work 24/7 at the ports. They already do. You'll hear the man who runs the port. He'll tell you about that in just a minute. So cargo ships and shipping facilities working 24/7. That's the answer. That's the solution. Really? They already do work 24/7. Next clip here. Production in China and electricity rationing. Now, you know how my brain works if you've been watching this show for any amount of time. Oh, I try not to be cynical, but China is known as the factory of the world. Everyone gets their stuff from China, or a lot of their stuff from China. And we're going to look at a graph in just a little bit. I'm going to show you some statistics on just how big a player China is in this. Now, I'm not here to tell you that China is the bad guy. I don't know who the bad guy is. I don't know who it is that's perhaps telling China what to do. Right? This thing is bigger than what we're actually able to point at and identify. Okay? Now, next here, what about this electricity rationing?
And in the factory of the world, China, output has slowed down for the first time since the pandemic started. Several provinces are suffering from power cuts and electricity rationing. The price of commodities has gone up. A major index measuring the cost of goods for wholesalers rose by 10.7% last month, the fastest jump in 26 years.
10%. That's huge. That's a big jump right there. All right, so China shut down their production. If we can trust anything that comes out of China or Al Jazeera, let's just take the narrative they're giving us and see if it makes sense. So, if it's true that China shut down and didn't produce anything for a couple weeks, or more or less, perhaps, if that is what could cause a global ripple effect for a supply chain to put people in other places under pressure, which people would be put under pressure? Who is it that's going to be hurt the most if China just stops producing for a couple weeks, for a month, for several months? What does warfare look like today, my friends? It's nonlinear. Just as the cardinal in the opening segment said, this is not war according to conventional terms. Nonlinear warfare. Doesn't look like the old war. So let's talk a little bit more about this about this Chinese energy shortage or Chinese manufacturing that's been thrown into disarray because of an electricity crisis or, rolling blackouts. They're running out of electricity. Is that really what's happening? Well, let's look at a couple minutes of this story here. So you can see what's going on there. They're being asked, says high energy consuming factories are asked to cut power consumption to 15%, not by 15%, but cut it to 15% of what they would normally be using between September 27th and October 1st. That's what the story is. That's what we're seeing now. Because of this shutdown, the world is catching a ripple effect. All right, so definitely affecting goods that are used throughout the world. So why? We ask why. We don't need to go too far down the rabbit hole. How much power does China actually have? All right, let's just think about that. I'm not here to tell you that China is your enemy. Because today, in the political paradigm, the conservatives or the Republicans are blaming the Chinese for everything, and the Democrats are blaming Russia for everything. But I'll show you some statistics in just a moment that'll give you a little idea of what might be really happening in the world. Who is actually being propped up? Who is actually being used as that primary chess piece to move the world in the direction that those who are have enough control to move it want it to go? Those guys who hang out at Davos or Bilderberg, those people. So we jump back now to the Al Jazeera story, and we go over here. Let's see, about the 3-minute mark, somewhere there. A little bit more from now we want to understand, how does this supply chain work? So if it's possible for China to stop producing something for a little while, why does that affect anybody? Well, we've already established, and it's a fact, and we'll show you more data here in just a minute, that most of the world gets its stuff from China. A lot of people do. It is the factory for the world, as we've heard already. But what does the supply chain look like? How does it work? Let's get a little bit of a, let's get some some information from some experts, some technocrats, who will explain to us how it works. Now, in my research too, this does appear to be the way the global economy is set up, so on something called the last minute principle. Most global trade operates on what's known as the low cost, low inventory system. What that means is, well, it also, what it does is it offers the ability to make the highest profits, but the system is clearly exposed to any upset that could occur along the supply chain. Right? The last minute principle. Goods are manufactured, immediately shipped, and they end up on the shelves as quickly as possible. No one is ordering surplus to stock and store. Now, you probably couldn't do that with food, right? That's why food is so important when it comes to supply chain. But for other goods, and it does seem like other goods, in the news anyway, seems like electronics and toys, stuff that you would buy for Christmas, seem to be the items that are unavailable at the moment. But this model, the last minute principle, not having warehouses full of stuff, just make it, ship it, sell it, repeat. That's the highest profit margin. So in this model, it would be, if you think about it, it would be very easy for a nation or one link in that chain that's supplying a vast amount of goods to the world, they could interrupt the supply chain. Now, a mistake could happen, or they could do it at will if they chose. So once again, which are we seeing? Mismanagement or planning, something that's planned? Is it unforeseen circumstances or a controlled demolition?
Describing this global supply chain is the fact that it works on this kind of last minute principle. The idea is that with frictionless borders, with all the supply chain working at once, everything gets to the shops, everything gets to the stores just in time, nothing is stockpiled. And for decades, that system has worked for the most part. But now with the pandemic and with Brexit and with a shortage of workers, that last minute principle is being really tested. Is it still working? Is it still the best way?
Okay, so we get the description of how it works there. And let me jump ahead to this point here where we're gonna this lady works for a bank in China. Let's hear what she has to say about this here.
Because an event like this is highly unpredictable. Nobody knew that there will be a supply chain disruption.
Nobody knew that there would be a supply chain disruption. Now, no, we could take her at her word for that. That's possible that could happen. But I'm asking you today, as what we've seen over the past year and a half, 2 years now, beginning back with Event 201 in October of 2019, are we ready to sit here and say, yeah, this was just a mistake? This was just a mistake. Everything that's happened over the past 2 years, as we look back on it, in 2020, hindsight vision, was something that was orchestrated. Without saying too much more here on this platform. Let's leave it there. So there's another piece here at this about the China's power crisis. So it seems to be that the story is China has a power crisis, electricity shortages. They're having to roll back their power consumption. That could be the case. Or, as we know, the goal for Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century, the new progressive way of world governance, the idea is to level the playing field. Of course, that doesn't mean to bring developing nations up to the level of developed nations. That means to bring developed nations down so that everyone has equal austerity. But anyway, let's see. Here's the
home. When you're talking about the Chinese power crisis, you're talking about a shortage of power within China itself. So there's electricity blackouts?
Correct. So there is a power shortage, and that is because the coal price is very high, but
Okay, so the power shortage is because the coal price is very high. So you see our chain of events here. Why is the coal price very high? Well, same thing, supply chain and coal. There's always a point at which this, you don't want to be too cynical, but you want to be reasonable. It is reasonable to assume that at some point along the line here, one link in this chain could cause the whole thing to break down. And especially if it came out of China, you can see who will suffer. Let's look at this. Let me share this with you. Now, this is from worldstopexports.com, and the sources on this are listed in the video underneath in the description for you. These are some the sources from the CIA's research teams. They put together these numbers. So these numbers are coming from pretty much the horse's mouth. You can check out those links if you want to look at them. So the top 10 export countries in the world: China, United States, Germany, Japan, the Netherlands, Hong Kong, which is essentially China now, again, South Korea, Italy, France, and Belgium. Now, what do these numbers tell us? If you look at it here, just take a look here. Growth over 2019 to 2020, China and Hong Kong. You see those? Hong Kong, it's essentially China. There's only two entities here who saw growth. Now, if we were making the case that certain nations were being squeezed to bring them down to the level of developing countries, and that's the way the game is played for, equality around the world. Well, let's look. What do we find out here when we look? Who were the biggest losers over that period of time? Well, United States. Down 13% over that period. Are we going to assume that that's something that just happened? Are we going to assume that everyone just fell asleep at the wheel and oops, we made a mistake? Look how far we fell. France, down at the bottom there in the 9 hole, 14%, down 14%. Japan. Not much brotherly love between China and Japan, down almost 10%. All right, Italy, close to 8%. South Korea, also not one of China's best friends. Netherlands. So Germany. So this is the world's top export countries in dollar value in their exports for the year of 2020, or as it was reported at year's end 2020. And it shows the change in the total value of exported products from 2019 to 2020. Now, we don't take this as our whole case, but this is another pin that we put on the board. After a while, after we put enough pins in the board, a picture begins to emerge. A pattern is seen. So the United States. You can make the argument here that the United States and some of the other perennial world leaders are being squeezed. Why? Well, if we're using the argument that the agenda for the 21st century is what's at work here, to bring developed nations down to the level of developing nations. All right? And for whatever reason, it seems that China is the nation that is being propped up for this purpose. Or we could assume that they're just that powerful of their own accord, of their own, that they're just that strong. They do have a couple billion people. So there's that. but it is one of the most harsh totalitarian regimes on the planet as well. But they make a lot of money for people, so people just seem to overlook that in order to do business with them. Collectively, those leading exports-based economies represent over half of total exports by value from all countries. So in this sense, with China being the factory of the world, you can affect over half the globe, the economy on the globe, on the economy of the world. By value, the top 25 largest exporting nations supplied roughly 4/5, that would be almost 80% of total exported products sold during 2020. So if you squeeze those nations, you squeeze the world. Now, of course, the answer is going to be, well, it was the pandemic. Of course, the pandemic caused all this. Things had to be shut down in the name of safety. Exporters posting large increases in the value of their international product sales from 2019 to 2020. Who were those who had the largest increases over this time period? Vietnam up 31%. Taiwan up 5%. Of course, China up 3.7%. And Hong Kong up 3%. Vietnam leading by far, up 31.5%. And, labor in Vietnam, it's very inexpensive. And as we all know, that area of the world been in lack and scarcity for a long time. So we see developing nations, developing areas having great success, developed so-called affluent nations going the other direction. This helps us in our argument when we're making our case that what they mean by equality is to bring developed nations down, not to bring developing nations up to the level of the rest of the world. Now, exporters posting double-digit declines over the year. Here's something interesting for you. Russia down 20%. Now look at your graph there, or look at your statistics. China, a leader, up 3.7%, nearly 4%. Vietnam up over 30%. The progressives would tell you that Russia is the enemy. According to the, if we're going to make the case that the global elites are working this like a chessboard, well, clearly, Russia's the one. Russia is in much the same position as the United States. France. India down 14.8%. Now that one would work against your theory a little bit, but India has had, as far as that one would work against the argument a little bit. United Kingdom down almost 15%. Of course, we saw France down over 14%. The U.S. down 13%. Canada down 13%. But overall, we see developed nations, the strongest economies, tanking, and the weakest economies in the world rising. Somewhere in the middle, it looks like is the goal for this new circular economy. Now, we've got another clip here. Let's go Fox News. Let's visit over to Fox News and get a little rhetoric from Fox News. Is China a bad actor here? What is coming out of the mainstream? If they are a bad actor, are they doing it all by themselves? Is it a perfect cover? Let's hear what we get from the mainstream. The news that they're happy for us to hear.
China, of course, the lion's share of the chips and the memory chips, the lion's share of these rare earth minerals that are in all demand right now. And I'm wondering if there are any signs that you see where China is sort of feeding this shortage by holding back, getting them to the United States and other countries.
Well, there's no question that China does control some of that, and here's the problem. We cannot trust China. They're not they are not a positive world actor. They look out only for themselves. They could care less about us or others. In fact, they have a plan where they really want to be the dominant force in the world in the next 50 years, and they're executing that plan right now. And we've got to understand that as a country, and we've got to understand that supply chain issues and things coming from China are something we can't guarantee, especially if there's a conflict, right?
So you can see here in these statistics that we're seeing, you noticed what we've got here. Look at what kind of goods and services are on the rise, doubling. Steak prices, right? Meat, luxury item meat, up 22%. Gas, Americans with their gas guzzling cars are all that freedom that's destroying the planet. Up, gas prices up almost 43%. Right? Or I'm sorry, that's fuel oil prices. Fuel oil. So that would have to do with heating, and then gas prices, almost the same thing, 42%. Putting the squeeze, and of course hotels. Hotel prices in September up almost 20%. So who are these increases really affecting? The affluent. Seafood prices in September up almost 11%. Right? We don't see grain prices increasing or anything like that. Well, maybe they do, but these are most significant rises. Television prices, luxury items, up almost 13%. So car rental, how about that? Car rental prices, almost 43%. All right, we saw some statistics just the other day. Used car prices up well over 20%. So once again, our argument is that the squeeze is being put on nations like the United States, nations like Australia, like Canada, like the UK, other places in Europe who have seen prosperity for a while. Squeeze them, bring them down. It's not organic. It's not organic. Come on. It's not reasonable. Okay, now these pundits, the experts, once again, the technocrats and what we would call lovingly shills, are saying that supply chain problems could last well into next year, maybe even beyond. What's the plan to fix it? Let's visit ABC News and see what the mainstream narrative is telling us over there. Joe Biden says that we're going to keep the ports open 24/7 to address this crisis. Remember earlier we heard Joe Biden say that? Hey, the answer is we're going to have these ports stay open 24/7. Let's listen to what the man who runs the port says about that.
Helping out. President Biden has released this strategy to try to solve this shipping crisis. Will President Biden's plan work?
Well, let's just step back to see what that plan is. It's the new theme song is that we're open. The Port of Los Angeles is open 24/7. So we have always been open 24 hours a day.
We have always been open 24 hours a day. So what the president said earlier, what's that about? Now we know he's just reading a teleprompter. So what is it that's coming out of this administration or these people who seem to have control of the helm at the moment? It's not an answer. You heard it from the man here.
24/7. So we have always been open 24 hours a day. So it's not something new. It's just something where people are getting stimulated to come pick up their cargo at different times of hours of the night, day and night. So we've always been here. We've always been available. And if the other parts of the supply chain decide on buying into that plan, the congestion should ease.
So again, some of these containers here for weeks, Kira, and the union leader's telling me this crisis isn't going to be over anytime soon. There's no switch to flip to turn this operation into 24/7 at every piece of this puzzle. They warned me this crisis could continue into next year.
So you hear what the reporter is telling us here is in direct contradiction to what the man who runs the port just said. Hey, we're always here working 24/7. I'm not sure what that song you guys are singing really is, but hey, we're always here. You know, it's not like those ships that are sitting out there off the coast waiting to come in here. We're open to receive them. So why aren't they docking? That's the question. That's the question. Why aren't they docking? Unloading. Because it's orchestrated. All right. We can see this. Right.
Holiday season. Kira.
I sure hope not. Kaylee Hartung there from the largest port in the country, by the way, Los Angeles. Thank you so much, Kaylee. Well,
of course, the largest port in the country, that would be the one where you want to bog it down, right?
Global supply chain issues severely impact the distribution of goods on an international scale, and as we've seen, have a very visible effect here in the United States. Sharply higher prices for food and energy, but also cars, clothing, and furniture, among other goods and services, is an everyday issue that is directly hurting consumers' wallets. So how can you expect it to hit yours?
Okay, so we saw earlier in our own poll a little trend developing that it's like paper products where you could find foam plates but no paper plates. And yesterday we experienced it. We were trying to pick up some extra paper products, and already being limited on how many we can pick up. We weren't trying to hoard or anything. We're just trying to pick up 2 packages of a particular paper product, and we were limited to 1 per day, so we got 1. So we're it's the paper. Not sure what to make of that, really. Let me do a little bit of research on that and find out why it is that seems to be something that. But of course, on our poll, let's update the poll. Let's find out what about toilet tissue. What's going on with toilet tissue right now? Look at that. Nobody. Interesting. In our comments, it seemed like on the shelves you don't see paper products. Or they seem to be down, but in the actual poll, it's food. It's food that people are seeing shortages or lack of options is what we saw. But no one so far out of 70 votes reporting that toilet tissue or paper products in general are low or in shortage. Okay. Now we jump back over here to the ABC. Let's see. No, right here. We're going to go back to our Al Jazeera story for just a minute. Is consuming foods locally, is that the answer? Right? Is the answer going to be to consume foods that are locally sourced? Is that a real solution to the problem we see? Let's jump back in here with our Al Jazeera gang and see what this part of the mainstream narrative is actually saying about this issue. Bear with us as we buffer. Yeah.
Power shortage certainly adds to the wall of this whole. They simply cannot guarantee the shipping delivery.
Stavros, in Plymouth, just before we came on air, my executive producer was eating a package of Oreos, and he made the point that perhaps we should be eating more locally. That one of the reasons for this is that we should be eating more locally. And I pointed out that actually the Oreos were made in America. Is this getting people to try and look at eating more food locally, using more locally manufactured goods? Is that a way around this crisis?
To be honest, I don't think so. That's a problem related with globalism at the moment, because even if you see what is happening in the UK, for example, a lot of local producers are saying that we don't have enough manpower to slaughter some of the animals. So
it's not a matter for the local food production. It's not a matter of supply chain shortage. It's a matter of lack of manpower. Do you see what a brilliantly orchestrated effort this has been? To limit you at every level.
Even if you try to eat locally, that means that we don't have enough resources at the moment. So
not enough resources. That's what we need here. Not enough resources. That's the point. That is the point. It will be told to you, listen, hey, grow your own food. Some places, according to the Sustainable Development Goals, in some areas, you're not allowed to have a garden. Not allowed to have a garden outside your house, but you're allowed to have a community garden for your community. Listen, folks, that's a pipe dream. You will not grow enough food in your little community garden for the people in your community. It doesn't work that way. It takes growers with massive amounts of land to feed a town, right? This is not an answer. This is a trick. This is not how it works. Should we consume products from closer to home? Yes, that's a good idea in general. Is it the answer? Is focusing on local food and goods, is that going to get us out? Is that going to save us from the big squeeze from Big Brother, from Biggest Brother? No, because the other squeeze is on. There's no manpower. There's no one to harvest. There's no one to slaughter the animals. There's also back here on the ABC News piece here, they dealt with this as well. Let's hear what we said here. That's at the 4-minute mark. Check out what they say here about this. Yeah, so the answer, obviously, consume locally. That's going to be the answer.
Much higher price. Food-wise, you alluded to that as well. A lot of people that I've been speaking with here locally say the best thing to do is to buy local. If you can go to a farmer's market, if you can go to a store that is sourced by local providers, that should help contain some of the costs in that those truck drivers are not moving cross-country or to a different part of where you are, and that is one way to manage at least food costs. Kira.
That's actually great advice. I mean, I'm all about supporting the local farmers.
I'm all about supporting the local farmers. Hey, that's because I'm disconnected from reality as I sit here in my studio reading my teleprompter. I have no idea what the real world works like. Yeah, you don't. You're not. It is, folks. It is a good idea to have, if you have access to land or know people who do, to work together and pull together and to grow. Only thing you can do is supplement. You're not going to feed everybody in your town off of a community garden. Now that's what you find in UN Agenda 21 Sustainable Development Goals. It encourages people to have community gardens. That doesn't feed people. You can supplement. You can have some nice, heirloom tomatoes for your salads, but you're not going to feed the people. It's not going to sustain the people. Now, one of the things that we say in the series Walking Dead, one of the things that stood out was that these folks were living in a prison. They had to be separated from the zombies who were out there walking. So, I mean, as silly as it is, there are some instructive things in that story. So they lived in this prison. I don't know, at one point they got up to maybe 2 or 3 dozen people living there. And the idea was, well, they had a garden out there and they were growing food and they had some pigs and not enough to even feed 3 dozen people. So they had to go out and make runs to get other stuff. But anyway, sorry for the raucous example there. But the point is made. They want to tell us, yes, you don't be growing. You can't grow stuff on your own land because that's not allowed according to the Sustainable Development Goals. You see, that's what's happening at the local level, down at your city council, things like that. I remember the last time I heard that, it was in Florida. A county or a city in Florida was disallowing anyone from growing vegetables on their property. This is an eyesore to the community, the homeowners association. So they limit people in that respect, but then they say, hey, get together and create a community garden. Not the answer. Not in the way society is today. Not at the size we have. And we're perfectly capable of feeding our population. What we need is for the technocrats, for the government to get out of the way. All right, but they're not going to get out of the way because this is their game. All right, now we're going to shift gears. I wanted to explain a little bit about the supply chain, the last minute principle. It's a system that is ready to break down at any moment. Right? Things are produced, shipped directly to the shelf and consumed. There is, and this is because the highest profit, the model that provides the highest profit margin. But it's not the model that protects the consumer. It doesn't protect the population. It keeps those in charge rich, but it doesn't protect the people. So there's that little piece. So we know that it would be very easy at any moment to squeeze the world. And maybe that's what we're seeing. All right. Now, something that's been on my mind for a while to talk to you guys about is something known as a breakaway civilization. Now we're going to lift the lid and go down into the rabbit hole just a bit here. Not too far, but just enough for some healthy speculation. We're going to talk a little bit, before we get into defining breakaway civilization, I want to introduce some of you and reintroduce to others of you Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of a counterpart of Heinz Kissinger. Sorry, that would be Henry Kissinger. Advisors, national security advisors to many presidents. It would seem that Brzezinski seemed to be an advisor for Democratic administrations, while Kissinger seemed to be an advisor more often for Republican administrations. Both of them not born in the United States, not Americans by birth, lending a little more credibility to our argument about a global takeover. Doesn't matter, you know. Well, let's just take a look at it. We're going to look at some quotes from Zbigniew Brzezinski from his book Between Two Ages. Right? The idea being, if you've got nothing to fear, you have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide. Right? That's the idea. I'm a good citizen. I don't have anything to hide. Yes, you do. Everybody does. It's not that you have something to hide. You have your dignity to uphold, privacy. Don't you think that this rollout of this medical procedure in the world today is doing an awful lot? If it didn't do anything else, it's doing an awful lot to get people to just let go of the idea of privacy. Privacy between you and your medical provider. It's essential to liberty. So you can see here, Zbigniew Brzezinski, advisor to, here he is, advisor to Reagan, a Republican. Also, Jimmy Carter, the Carter administration. Now, these men, Kissinger, Brzezinski, they're not Democrats or Republicans. They're globalists. That's what they are. They play the role they need to play at the time they're called to play it. Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. All right, this is a book from 1970. Zbigniew Brzezinski, foreign policy specialist, advisor to Democratic presidents John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, Jimmy Carter, as a consultant, as a member of the State Department, and as President Carter's assistant to the president for national security affairs, right in there where the big decisions are made. He urged the United States to adopt a foreign policy that emphasized human rights. Firm opposition to all attempts by the Soviet Union to increase its influence in the Third World, and improved relations with China. Zbigniew Brzezinski was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1928. His father, Polish diplomat, lived in France and Germany before the family settled in Montreal, Canada in 1938. He earned a bachelor's degree in 1949 and a master's degree in 1950 in economics and political science from McGill University in Montreal. 1953, he earned his doctorate from Harvard. He was taught at Harvard until he was appointed professor of public law and government at Columbia University in 1960. 1961, he became the director of Columbia's newly formed Institute on Communist Affairs. During the turbulent Cold War era of the 1960s, Brzezinski became well known for his prediction that the changes brought about by the emergence of the post-industrial, highly technical culture in the United States, Europe, and Japan would ease tensions between capitalist and communist nations, but increase the gap between them and less developed countries. In addition to writing numerous articles on foreign policy issues, Brzezinski served as one of Kennedy's pre-inaugural foreign policy advisors. So you have to wonder about people who are unelected, but just seem to be right there with all the elected officials. So who's running the show? These are the experts. These are the technocrats. High level, top level technocrats. He strongly supported American involvement in the war in Vietnam on the grounds that unless the United States managed to impose peace in Asia, peace meaning control, in Asia through the creation of a stable balance of power, as it had in Europe, wars there would be endless. Do we really believe that any of these people in charge want to stop the flow of wealth that comes from wars? Of course they don't. It's just a different kind of war now. President Johnson appointed Brzezinski to the Department of State's Policy Planning Council in 1966, and then Brzezinski orchestrated the foreign policy positions of presidential candidate Hubert Humphrey. 1976, President-elect Carter appointed him to serve as the assistant to the president for national security affairs. He's always been right there in those positions of great influence, unelected, always there. Why? How? Who determines? Who makes the choice? Is he just that smart? Brzezinski favored confronting Soviet foreign policy initiatives wherever they occurred. Didn't do very much to stop them, because look at the demoralization plan that's happened here in this country. Even if that prevented successful negotiation on nuclear arms control agreement, during the early phases of the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, Brzezinski supported informing the Shah and his military leaders that the United States would not oppose an effort by the Iranian military to maintain control. Secretary of State Vance disagreed with this. An ambiguous message was eventually transmitted to the Shah, so we're seeing where he was aligned on some of these issues. And of course, the American embassy was seized under Carter. This was the hostage crisis, the Iranian hostage crisis. Brzezinski was pressing for a rescue mission against the objections of Vance. After the rescue attempt authorized by the president ended in failure in the Iranian desert, well, things changed. After completing his term in office in January 1981, Brzezinski resumed teaching, lecturing, consulting, and writing on foreign policy issues. Now, for a man who's been right there in these positions, what are his thoughts? How has he affected things? What does he know? So I've got a couple quotes I want to share with you here in just a minute, but let's take a look first of all. Let's visit our old pal James Corbett, who's, done some excellent work on some of these characters. Let's just do just a minute of his. Let's listen to Brzezinski himself describe himself as the conspirator.
You mentioned something earlier that you've done that comes up right in the spot that you're sitting many times by our callers across the country, and that is a suspicion that there is a conspiracy afoot through the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations. You ran the Trilateral Commission for how long?
about 3 years, I think, something like that, 3 years. Not only did I run it, I helped to found it and organize it with David Rockefeller. So if any of our viewers are conspiracy-minded, here is one of the conspirators.
It's funny watching someone try to hide an uncomfortable truth under equally uncomfortable laughter now, isn't it?
Indeed. Indeed, James. It is. So let's have a look at this quote I've got for you that comes out of Brzezinski's seminal piece, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. Here's the way he saw things. 1970. The Technotronic Era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Now, we're not just saying he's saying, hey, this is possible, we need to look out for it. No, he's identifying the opportunity for, if we want to call it the New World Order, for this globalism. Now, this is long about the same time that what we know now as Agenda 21 was being formed. It happened in the early 70s, about 20 years before the 92 summit in Rio. No coincidence. So the Technotronic era involves, let's make that look a little better. There we go. Make sure you can see the bottom of that. There we go. It involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Of course not. Why would they be unrestrained by traditional values? Because over a period of time, certainly they would destroy those traditional values, and we see that happening around us. And the way we do that, we learn, folks, if we're paying attention to what Yuri Bezmenov, or his American name, Thomas Schumann, was telling us in the videos we've shared with you. We've covered it here. We've put it on True Normal TV for you to see over and over. Society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. How could that be possible? Demoralization, destabilization. Create the crisis, and then you bring in normalization. You completely change the way a nation thinks and acts within just a generation or two. He says, soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen. This is 1970, he's saying this. And maintain up-to-date complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. Social credit. You carry this capability around in your pocket every day now. And soon, it's just, a theory on my part. And our brother Days of Noah has done excellent work on biometrics and explaining just how perhaps the jab, perhaps other things could be preparing us, recreating us in such a way that there's no need for a chip. There's no need for anything. That you will certainly at some point become a node on the network yourself. Anyway, it goes on to say, in Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era from 1970, in the Technotronic society, the trend would seem to be towards the aggregation of the individual support of millions of uncoordinated citizens, bringing together support from millions of people that's seemingly uncoordinated, but they're not, easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities exploiting the latest communications techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason. How are we going to change it? How are we going to remove the traditions and create a new ideology, a new secular world where the government becomes God, just like in all communist regimes? Get them to worship idols. Give them idols to worship, like Nebuchadnezzar. You must fall down and worship the idol when all the music begins to play. Get them to worship these idols. Change the way they think. Get them to stop thinking about God altogether. Take God out of the conversation. positivism, the philosophical movement of positivism, which is where scientism comes from. Essentially what positivism says, which is how our scientists today think, they were trained under these ideas. Positivism says that any discussion whatsoever about the supernatural or God is useless. We don't even entertain it. Why? That's because science is the ultimate truth. And man is the measure of all things. Right? So when God is rejected, when God is ignored, well, then the people they have to find an absolute authority somewhere. And of course, the government's there to do it. And how has it been done? Aggregating the individual support of millions of uncoordinated individuals, uncoordinated citizens, easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities, people who will train you in how to think. Do you watch a lot of movies? Do you have favorite celebrities and sports stars? Why have we ever wondered why are they so famous? Attractive, magnetic personalities, exploiting the latest communication techniques. How can we get the people to watch these people constantly? Well, radio, television, the internet, your phone, we're constantly looking. Cardi B, Nicki Minaj, these people, we're just constantly. Taylor Swift, these are the idols. And what are these idols being used to do? Destroy tradition, manipulate emotions, and control reason. This is how we find ourselves in an age where there is no truth. Hey, that's true for you. It's not for me. It's okay. We can all have our own truth. I've got to live my truth. You hear that from people who are Christians, supposed to be Christians. The son of the former Southern Baptist Convention who recently came out as homosexual, in one of his tweets a couple years ago, made the statement, I have to live my truth. This is a person who, will tell you he's a Christian. You can't be a Christian and then and make a statement like, oh, there's my truth. I have to be true to my truth. So you see what's happened. Exploiting the latest communications techniques with these idols, give the people idols so that you can manipulate their emotions and control reason. You can give them a debased mind. They'll be very easy to move in that condition. So, Breakaway Civilization. Did I pull that down? I wanted you to see that. There you go. The trend would seem to be towards the aggregation of the individual support of uncoordinated citizens for the purpose of manipulating emotions and controlling reason, and doing it by attractive personalities, magnetic and attractive personalities. And we'll exploit the latest technology, the latest techniques to do this. This is the man who advised many presidents. The counterpart could say to Henry Kissinger and folks there. Their ideologies were not all that different. Of course, they're advising along the same lines. These are the Bilderbergers. These are the Davos men of, what we would call the Davos men today. That's what we're dealing with. Now, the thing we want to look at now is a breakaway civilization. What are we talking about when we say a breakaway civilization? What does that even mean? I'm going to appeal to some research by a man by the name of Richard Dolan, who is an author, a historian, and he's a UFO author and a history writer. And so that's what I said. We're going to go into the rabbit hole just a bit. Let's keep our bearings. We know where our foundation is in absolute truth. Eternal truth. So the term breakaway civilization, coined by Richard Dolan after his exhaustive and extensive research into his books UFOs and the National Security State, volumes 1 and 2. Excellent books. I've read these. These are interesting pieces because what they do is they analyze the history of the this thing we call the UFO phenomenon. Not making too many arguments about what it is, but about how the government reacts to it or uses it. The idea most of the time here is it's a great cover-up of some kind. Well, stay tuned. I'll tell you what I think this is. He came to the realization that deep, secretive, black budget world had actually become a civilization on its own, with its own exotic technology, a different view of the cosmos, a different view of our place in the cosmos, and a different version of human history. A different version of human history that doesn't match the truth found in Scripture. So it's a different ideology altogether. It is its own religion. Now think about it. If you had access to so much wealth that wealth wasn't your concern anymore, the next thing you want is power. And once you have power, your only job at that point, your only duty is to keep yourself in power. And technology is the way you do that. So you develop technologies and you keep them for yourself. I mean, look, if you develop a technology that is assured to keep you in your position of power, you are absolutely not going to share that technology with the world, right? That's how that works. So it is my opinion that the things people see flying in the skies are just technology. Of course, people will make the argument that a lot of it is demonic, and I yeah, okay, agree with that too. That can be the case, but we'll take the simplest explanation, right? And we'll also accept supernatural ones as well. But for the most part, the things people see acting strange in the sky, it's technology. There's no evidence to suggest that it's anything but technology that originates here on Earth. One of the greatest cover-ups of all time is to say, yes, those things are obviously from off-planet. All right. The odds of that are so far-fetched that it's not a reasonable conclusion. In one of his lectures, Richard Dolan defined a breakaway civilization as a radically advanced and increasingly separate structure that has access to classified science and data that is denied to the rest of us. Now, those people who control great wealth, great power, have access to so much wealth that they can fund their own research into technologies that to us would blow our minds. I'm sure it is often said that the military is and must be at least 20 to 30 years, maybe even more, ahead in the technology that they have and use. So the technology available in some of the fighter jets, some of the nuclear-powered warships, submarines, some of that technology, they say, is technology that is 20 to 30 years ahead of what's available to the consumer. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Considering what's at stake. And you would keep that secret, right? If you had enemies in the world and you wanted to protect your position in the world. Now let's take that theory and apply it in a different way. You are the elite, you are the wealthy, you are those few who have enough wealth and power to affect the trajectory of civilization, or to affect economies, and you can affect the globe. You can affect the way what happens in the world. You can play the world like a chessboard. Another book that was written by The Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski. Well, now that works kind of like the military. You're in this position because suddenly anyone out there who threatens your power is the enemy, so you're going to have your own security. Right? We're living in the national security state, and it's not all about keeping secrets from the people because we have enemies out there who want to attack us and take our freedoms. No, the national security state has to do with keeping the truth away from the masses. Ultimately. In Dolan's book titled After Disclosure, he described the breakaway civilization this way. He said, there is a clandestine group that possesses technology that is vastly superior to that of the mainstream world. The ability to explore areas of our world and surroundings presently unavailable to the rest of us. Possibly interactions or encounters with the others, capital O, the others who are here in our reality. Now, Richard Dolan's a little more accepting of the possibility that there are entities from other areas in the universe actually visiting us here. Entities visiting us here are probably from another dimension, and they're most likely demonic. Also, there are entities from another dimension here who are angelic. It's a supernatural realm. We don't have to make up aliens for this. Scientific and cosmological understandings that give them greater insights into the nature of our world. A significant built off the grid infrastructure. Now he's talking about the breakaway civilization here, not aliens necessarily. They have a significant infrastructure that was built somewhere off grid, partially underground, Denver Airport, Dulce Bay, lots of others, And this affords them a high degree of secrecy and independence of action. They're able to keep it private. Controversial and self-proclaimed whistleblower Corey Good and Blue Avians, anyway, claims there is not one but at least 11 breakaway civilizations. I don't trust a word that comes out of that guy's mouth. But continuing here with Dolan's case, most of these would be subterranean. Some of those used to be in an alliance, allegedly called the Secret Space Program Alliance, but would have split up. Now, this also brings up the idea of the secret space program. I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with the idea of a secret space program. It would make perfect sense. And we can see today there are private companies, ostensibly anyway, sending people high in the atmosphere, possibly to space. Now, I'm not one of those who's going to sit here and tell you that space is fake. I know people think that. I know people are very firm on their position that there's no such thing as outer space. I don't know what good it does for me would do for me to take that position, but anyway, let's divert from that. We're talking about a breakaway civilization because what we're looking at in our world today, we can tell that there is at least one group, but I would say probably many groups who do have power. These are the people that meet at Bilderberg. These are the people that meet at Davos and other places. The Bohemian Grove, perhaps, or wherever. And these people have access to so much power that they could certainly be living amongst us, but living according to a standard that we know nothing about. We have no way of knowing about it unless we happen to see something every now and then that looks strange in the sky. What that is, I don't know. But there appears to be a technology in our skies, on our planet, that does not match what is generally known according to physics, to the known physics. That I'm comfortable saying. So now let's look at a little more of the, well, first of all, a little bit more into Dolan's case here. The puzzling aspect of the UFO phenomenon, what they call ufology, the study of UFOs. All but one of the heavy hitters in the field refused to go anywhere near this issue due to the potential sneer factor. People will think you're crazy if you start talking about UFOs. There's nothing wrong with the term. It's just unidentified, right? And those of us who are able to employ a little more reason on the issue, it's just, it's technology. Technology from Earth. We have no reason to assume it's technology from anywhere else just because it seems to do things that we haven't seen things do before. Is a covert breakaway civilization responsible for a breakaway civilization, a technology that exists that could even make it possible for them to have a secret space program? I'm not as interested in the secret space program as I am the amount of power that they have to affect the world right now as they live unaffected by pandemics, as they live unaffected by supply chain shortages, as they live unaffected to the restrictions on air travel and all this. They live outside of our daily experience. So you find questions like this in it. Did the Nazis land on the moon or Mars during the final days of World War II? Personally, I think that is nonsense. Have astronauts planted the Masonic flag on both the moon and Mars? Are the boomerang and triangular UFOs observed worldwide part of a global surveillance program offering evidence that someone else is capable of taking over our sky? Was the late super scientist Nikola Tesla involved in the early development of this secret space program? Now, what are we looking at here? The idea that a very real breakaway civilization is with us. What would you do if you were those folks and you wanted to make sure that no one ever discovered what you were really doing? Get them to start looking out there. Get them to start looking out for Mars. What did the Nazis do on Mars? Get them interested in all that. Get them interested in flat Earth. Now they're just looking right over the thing that's right there in front of their face. Now, it is a fact that for centuries, anomalies have been reported by astronomers. It's evident that our own space agency, NASA, or some agency from another earthly country seems to be wandering around, perhaps in the upper atmosphere or low Earth orbit. And they seem to be most vigorous in their ongoing efforts, which our government and military would seem to be keeping hush-hush as they possibly can. But it does seem that the cat has escaped from the bag. A little more about this. Let's think about this breakaway civilization a little more. Why is this important? Is this sensationalism? No. As we see the world moving as it has over the past year and a half to 2 years, people like Gates, people like Fauci, Trump, Biden, this is not the breakaway civilization. These are those who are placed out here for us to watch and get mad at and absorb all of our ire or adoration as those whose names you don't know sit and control the pieces on the board. According to Dolan, one of the ideas I've been kicking around for the last few years, Dolan said, is that of a breakaway civilization. I think that this is something that is real. Now, my theory of it is that it originated really in a post-World War II society, but there's nothing preventing such a thing from having happened even earlier. I tend to share Richard Dolan's perspective on this. I don't share his notion that it's in any way off-world. But, he says, the basic idea of the breakaway civilization is simply that you have a secret group, a classified group of people with access to radically advanced technology, radically advanced science, and they just don't share it with the rest of the world. One scientific breakthrough leads to another, and that leads to another, and so on. The next thing you know, you've got a separate group of humanity that is vastly far beyond the rest of the world. Dolan said this isn't necessarily a far-fetched notion. I would agree with him there. He says, in our own official world history, you go back 200 years and compare levels of technology from Europe to, say, Central Africa, and you're talking about two vastly different ways of understanding the world. So, really, what is the difficulty in understanding that a classified, secret scientific community would make radical breakthroughs that they would not share. I don't think it's outrageous, and I do think that this has happened since World War II. Now, one of the breakthroughs they've made is in what we would call anti-gravity technology. I agree. I think that's reasonable to assume. Could this have happened in the 19th century? Dolan thinks it's not an impossible theory. He says, I've speculated privately many times whether there has been a secret breakaway group going back to ancient times even. When you look at some of the really puzzling mysteries of our ancient world, whether it's the Great Pyramid of Giza, Machu Picchu, there are elements of those and other architectural sites that have been left behind that to me at least don't make a whole lot of sense in the context of human society as it then was supposed to have existed. I agree with that too. We look back at things like the Pyramid of Giza. We look back at these ancient megalithic sites. I'm not talking about piles of rocks. I'm talking about these things that are extremely very advanced for the time. And what you can see when you look back at these things, if the dating is correct, there were these incredible structures. And then something happened. And the ability to reproduce them was lost. And things were built that looked far less impressive, inferior. Now, according to the Christian worldview, that is something that we can explain. It fits into our worldview very easily. There was something known as a flood, when before the flood, a great move of knowledge and intelligence, and the people rejected God, and they were arrogant, they were proud, they were able to do things, incredible things, and they were wiped out and started over. Christian worldview has a reasonable explanation for that. But the Great Pyramid, Dolan says, the Great Pyramid doesn't make sense to me in terms of 2,500 years ago in ancient Egyptian culture. What stands out to me when I look at these ancient civilizations that did seem to be at least advanced in some ways of their ability to construct these amazing structures and have very creative minds. What stands out to me is how they're gone, how they don't exist anymore. That's what we need to be focused on, and that's what the Christian worldview offers you, is that, look, there is a sovereign God who is in control of all this. And when these people get too arrogant, get too out of control, too haughty, he will act. Dolan says, I wonder if this was a human construct at the time, and what human civilization are we actually talking about here? So I leave open the possibility that some great secret would be understood by a very small, elect group of people. They would want to hide this from the rest of the world for obvious reasons. Power, of course, and just simply not wanting to share. Now we could talk about the sophistication of the Nazis if we wanted to here. He says, when I started getting into this study many, many years ago, I certainly had a very poor appreciation of just how sophisticated the research was in the field. I've definitely come to a very different opinion now. The Nazis were quite sophisticated. Of course they were. Project Paperclip is not a conspiracy theory. It's a thing that happened. Those scientists from Nazi scientists were divided up between the Soviet Union and what appears to be between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then those just happened to be the two superpowers that became at odds. Maybe not at odds, really. That's debatable. But it says the Nazis were quite sophisticated in their science of what we would call something like flying saucer technology. In their science of what we would call, aeronautics. We now know this. Here's the problem, though, with that theory. I don't think one can state the case that the Nazis explained the entire UFO phenomenon. Not even close. Dolan said he had visited the Canadian National Archives in Ottawa to review Canadian UFO reports and came across a story written by an elderly man in the 1980s who wrote about his experience in the Northwest Territory doing aerial mapping for the Canadian government in 1936. 1936. According to Dolan, the man had a perfect crystal clear sighting of the most beautiful aerial object he had ever seen. The object was oblong, a little longer than it was wide, and he stood looking up, just amazed at what he was seeing. The object took off and within 2 seconds was at the horizon. It never at any point made a sound. A typical, even classic UFO sighting, right? But Dolan's point was more about when it occurred. He said it is true that in 1936 the Nazis were in power, but it is also true that in 1936 their science in this field was still in its bare infancy. As far as anyone could tell, let's assume that this story is true. That tells me that in 1936 you've got a perfectly functioning, incredible UFO in the middle of nowhere in northern Canada doing what? What was it doing there? Someone's supposed to tell me that that's Nazi technology. He says, sorry, but I don't buy it. People who argue that UFOs are strictly Nazi technology need to do a little more research into the phenomenon itself. It goes back much further than the 30s, that's for sure. And this is the case I'm interested in making here. Breakaway civilization probably has always existed. It's either a very, very clandestine human intelligence that exists as a long-standing secret society. Of course, we need to find their manufacturing plant and where they're located, or we're dealing with non-humans here that are interacting with planet Earth. I don't think it's necessary to assume that we're dealing with non-humans at all. I think that would be a very effective cover story. Anyway, he says, I actually think the latter theory is more likely, but there certainly is a clandestine human power structure. He says, I don't dispute that, but there are just too many witness claims and descriptions of non-human entities. He says, I don't believe these are all just faked or screen memories, and I don't either. I would agree with that. I think people are actually seeing entities that are not human, and I would agree with that too. As to what they are, that's where the Christian worldview has no problem defining what they are. So who is running the show? Who's in charge? Dolan says, I've tried to figure this one out myself. At least the human part of it. I scratch my head about that frequently. It's certainly not the President of the United States. I can agree there. It's obvious that there is a power structure behind every president. You look at every president of the last almost 50 years, and really every one of them got into office because of one man named David Rockefeller. He nodded his head and said, yes, that's the one that's going in. I think a lot of us can agree with that assertion too. That's just how it is. Rockefeller was instrumental behind Gerald Ford. He and Zbigniew Brzezinski practically, literally lifted Jimmy Carter up from Georgia and plunked him in the White House. This is what we've seen happen with Joe Biden as well. He's not necessarily Rockefeller, but he's been picked up and plunked in the White House. He is the resident of the White House, certainly not the president. Carter, of course, advised by Brzezinski. Rockefeller was very powerful and prominent in the Reagan administration as well. He was now, of course, when we look at the history of Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, we know we can definitely show how the Rockefeller family pulled Henry Kissinger up out of his homeland, brought him here, educated him, said he is their guy. So you can't have the Rockefeller sitting there advising the presidents. That's a little too obvious. You've got to bring in your surrogate, your agent. Says he was essentially Rockefeller was essentially the political grandfather of George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush was always a protege of Kissinger, and Kissinger always worked for Rockefeller. Rockefeller, Brzezinski, Rockefeller, Kissinger. Bill Clinton was very much desired by the Rockefeller people. Clinton attended the first Bilderberger meeting in 1991, and that was the year before he got the Democratic nomination, essentially coming out of nowhere. No accident, of course. And it goes on and on. Who's one of Obama's, or who was at this time, this was written during the time of Obama, but who's one of Obama's senior aides and advisors? It was Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Rockefeller man. So all of these presidents are backed not just by David Rockefeller, who obviously is in his, at this time, he was still alive, he's dead now, but that clique of financial power that surrounds him. I think, of course, Rockefeller, it goes beyond Rockefeller. This is the locus of real power in the world today. This is where real power comes from. Dolan says, my supposition is simply that just as global financial interests are the dominant force behind U.S. foreign policy and U.S. financial policy, so too, I believe, they are probably the dominant players in managing UFO technology and the secret space program. He says, I believe that, but I cannot yet prove it. The most tangible thing that Dolan feels he can point to is that special access programs, or what we know as black budget projects in the United States, all indicate a preponderance of private power as opposed to public power. Okay, and what do we see a push for in the world today? The blending of the public and the private, a move away from government buying for the people and a move toward governance. In other words, he explained, the U.S. Department of Defense personnel do not appear to be the key players in these special access programs. Rather, it's private contractors like Boeing, Lockheed, or General Electric, and so forth, and probably many, many others who aren't, like now we would see pharmaceutical industry players, not just aeronautics or space. It says they really run the show. What we have is, at the classified level, private money that is more likely calling the shots. Agreed. That's how the government has operated for more than a century, and it makes sense to me that the UFO technology or whatever other technology out there, that the UFO technology issue would become privatized at some point. That the space program would become privatized. Perhaps it always has been. Anyway, he says that it would become the secret clandestine space program would also be to a large extent privatized. And that what that does essentially is it makes it very easy. You don't have to answer to the public anymore. And it certainly would help with the secrecy as well. It's easier to have something proprietary instead of merely classified. Right? You can do a freedom of information request on something that's classified. You can't do anything about a private corporation's proprietary research. If you want to keep a secret, he says, and I think a lot of this has gone into private hands. While government institutions may still have their fingers in the pie, Dolan said the technology and the knowledge that's truly important is outside the public realm, and it's outside the public purview. When asked if he had, actually, let's ask the question, what do we know and what do we not know? Now, this all applies very specifically to what we see happening in the world today and what we've been talking about, supply chain breakdowns. Now, these things, folks, these things, there's too much involved for this to be organic. When asked if he had any concluding remarks, Dolan spoke out about the need for proof in a field where so much must be taken on faith. He's talking about the UFO field. I don't think it's necessary to talk about aliens. It's just, I feel that's a distraction. That's a distraction from where we ought to be looking. He says, we're in a field where there are certain things we know and there are certain things we don't know, and we always have to remember the difference. One thing that I can say we know is that there is a genuine UFO phenomenon and that this phenomenon has engaged with the United States military for many years. And I would agree with that. And that's what we see being pushed on us right now, coming out, the Pentagon, all the new UFO videos from the Navy. There's no reason for us to assume that it's alien. Why would we? We've been primed. We've been primed to assume that it's alien. He says, we know this is true because we have a certain number of released documents that prove it. And now, even after this piece, we have these videos, whatever they are, that prove we have been concerned about this phenomenon, that we have tried to intercept these vehicles, and that we've seen them, military personnel, visually, and tracked them on radar. All of that and more. That is unarguable, and you can take it to the bank. Much of the rest of it is guesswork, and it's fair to guess. We have to guess, he says. We have to create a hypothesis. The only thing that I try to remind myself and others of is that when we're creating a hypothesis, we need to distinguish that from known fact. All right, we've got to be careful how we handle our evidence. I speculate as much as anyone at this point in the game. I'm very happy to speculate. I just want to make it clear to people who read what I have to say or listen to me that when I come to a conclusion, A, it's always a provisional conclusion, and B, it's always based on what I consider to be evidence. Dolan said he wasn't totally happy to use secret inside sources in his work because it put people in the position of having to choose whether to trust him or not based on the claims of a source he could not bring before the public. It's much better to work efficiently from public certified sources and carefully assemble one's hypothesis on that basis. He says we're in deep waters with this. It's very easy to lose our footing. It's very easy to drown, and you've got to be careful. So this offers a little bit about what Dolan is talking about with this breakaway, this idea of a breakaway civilization. I think it's a reasonable assertion, and what we see happening in our world around us today. Now, Dolan has done great work on the on 9/11. What we have to very carefully here on this platform call false flags. They exist, they're real, they happen. He's done good work on that as well. You can find that stuff if you search it online. So let's look at a little more as we bring it around here. Look at a little more about this issue of a group of people living amongst us, living on the planet with us, who do not live according to the same technology or standards of living that we live by. In fact, they could be playing us just like a chessboard. What about the wealthy? Are they plotting to leave us behind? This is an article from Matt Hune. This is from 2018. No, this is from an article from Douglas Rushkoff. It says, last year I got invited to a super deluxe private resort to deliver a keynote speech to what I assume would be 100 or so investment bankers. By far the largest fee I've had ever been offered for a talk. 100 or so investment bankers, yeah. And they obviously paid him quite well. About half my annual professor's salaries. All to deliver some insight on the subject of the future of technology. I've never liked talking about the future. The Q&A sessions always end up more like parlor games where I'm asked to opine on the latest technology buzzwords as if they're ticker symbols for potential investments. Blockchain, 3D printing, CRISPR, genetic alteration technology. The audiences are rarely interested in learning about these technologies or the potential impacts beyond the binary choice of whether or not to invest in them. But money talks, he says, so I took the gig. After I arrived, I was ushered into what I thought was the green room. But instead of being wired with a microphone or taken to a stage, I just sat there at a plain round table as my audience was brought to me. 5 super wealthy guys, all men from the upper echelon of the hedge fund world. After a bit of small talk, I realized they had no interest in the information I had prepared about the future of technology. They had come with questions of their own. They started out innocent enough. Should I use Ethereum or Bitcoin? Is it quantum computing? Is that a real thing? Slowly but surely, however, they edged into their real concerns. Which region will be less impacted by the coming climate crisis? They wanted to know. New Zealand or Alaska? Is Google really building Ray Kurzweil a home for his brain? And will his consciousness live through the transition, or will it die and be reborn as a whole new one? Finally, the CEO of a brokerage house explained that he had nearly completed building his own underground bunker system and asked, how do I maintain authority over my security force after the event? After the event? What could he possibly mean by the event? And how do I maintain authority over my security force after the event? Is something coming? The event. That was their euphemism for the environmental collapse, social unrest, nuclear explosion, unstoppable virus, or Mr. Robot hack that takes everything down. The single question occupied us for the rest of the hour. They knew armed guards would be required to protect their compounds from the angry mobs. But how would they pay the guards once money was worthless? What would stop the guards from choosing their own leader? The billionaires considered using special combination locks on the food supply that only they knew, or making guards wear disciplinary collars of some kind in return for their survival. Disciplinary collar, like shock collar, to keep people under control. Or maybe building robots to serve as guards and workers, if that technology could be developed in time. You see what these most wealthy people in the world are actually concerned about? How to keep their position of power. That's when it hit me. He said, at least as far as these gentlemen were concerned, this was a talk about the future of technology, taking their cue from Elon Musk, colonizing Mars, Peter Thiel, reversing the aging process, or Sam Altman and Ray Kurzweil uploading their minds into supercomputers. They were preparing for a digital future that had a whole lot less to do with making the world a better place than it did with transcending the human condition altogether and insulating themselves from a very real and present danger of climate change, rising sea levels, mass migrations, global pandemics, nativist panic, and resource depletion. For them, the future of technology is really about just one thing: escape. Escape. They want to escape the planet. You see, on one hand, they're over here talking about going off world and inhabiting other planets. Meanwhile, they're stuck in the flesh and can't do anything about it. It says there's nothing wrong with madly optimistic appraisals of how technology might benefit human society, but the current drive for a post-human utopia, well, that's something else. It's less a vision for the wholesale migration of humanity to a new state of being, that quest to transcend all that is human, to transcend the body, interdependence, compassion, vulnerability, and complexity. As technology philosophers have been pointing out for years now, the transhumanist vision too easily reduces all of reality into data, concluding that humans are nothing but information processing objects. And you see, in my opinion, as I can step aside for a moment, that'll be their downfall. That'll be their downfall. They reject God. They reject the supernatural. Their minds have been darkened. They cannot reason properly. Romans chapter 1 and 2 will tell you this plainly. They see humans as information processing objects. Nonetheless, it says here, it's a reduction of human evolution to a video game that someone wins by finding the escape hatch and then letting a few of his best friends come along for the ride. Will it be Musk? Will it be Bezos? Will it be Thiel or Zuckerberg? Who's going to win? These billionaires are the presumptive winners of the digital economy, the same survival of the fittest business landscape that's fueling most of this speculation to begin with. But it wasn't always this way. There was a brief moment in the early 90s when the digital future felt open-ended and for our invention. Remember what happened in the early 90s. 1992, Rio Summit. That's where Agenda 21 began. The infrastructure, the policy, the set of policies for this thing we call the New World Order. Technology was becoming a playground for the counterculture who saw in it the opportunity to create a more inclusive, distributed, and pro-human future. There's a value judgment. Once again, what standard do they base that value judgment on? But established business interests only saw new potentials for the same old extraction, and too many technologists were seduced by unicorn IPOs. Digital futures became understood more like stock futures or cotton futures, something to predict and make bets on. So nearly every speech, article, study, documentary, or white paper was seen as relevant only insofar as it pointed to a ticker symbol. How can we make money on this? How can we make money? The future became less a thing we create through our present-day choices or hopes for humankind than a predestined scenario we bet on with our venture capital but arrive at passively. So he's noticing here that something's changed. It's not actually about the money anymore. It's about hanging on to the power when the SHTF event happens, that event. This freed everyone from the moral implications of their activities. Technology development became less a story of collective flourishing than personal survival. Worse, he says, as I learned, to call attention to any of this was to unintentionally cast oneself as an enemy of the market or an anti-technology curmudgeon. Right. They only want to hear from the people who are willing to support them in their quest to keep their position of power. It is not a movement for humanity. It is an anti-human movement, because once the self has been deified, as it has in these people, then all the other selves around you become enemies. Enemies, threats to your position of power. So instead of considering the practical ethics of impoverishing and exploiting the many, the masses, in the name of the few, most academics, journalists, and science fiction writers instead considered much more abstract and fanciful conundrums. Is it fair for a stock trader to use smart drugs to make him think faster, better, more effective? Should children get implants so they can speak foreign languages? Do we want autonomous vehicles to prioritize the lives of pedestrians over those of its passengers? Should the first Mars colonies be run as democracies? Does changing my DNA undermine my identity? Should robots have rights? What do you think? Asking these sort of questions while philosophically entertaining is a poor substitute for wrestling with the real moral quandaries associated with unbridled technological development in the name of corporate capitalism. Digital platforms have turned an already exploitative and extractive marketplace, think Walmart, into an even more dehumanizing successor, think Amazon. We're all guilty. Most of us become aware of these downsides in the form of automated jobs, the gig economy, and the demise of local retail. But more devastating impacts of pedal-to-the-metal digital capitalism fall on the environmental and global poor. Now we're going to get some ideology here. The manufacture of some of our computers and smartphones still uses networks of slave labor, and it always will. It's just that the amount of slaves is going to become more vast. We're all going to be in that class. That's the goal of this movement. These practices are so deeply entrenched that a company called Fairphone, founded from the ground up to make and market ethical phones, that's a silly title, learned that it was impossible to do. The company's founder now sadly refers to their products as fairer phones. Same thing happened in coffee. Remember, it used to be called ethical trade. Now it's called fair trade because they know it's not possible. Someone is going to be taken advantage of, and they're happy to do it. And they're happy to do it while they tell us how wrong it is for people to do it. Meanwhile, the mining of rare earth metals, remember, what have we heard today? One of the materials that's in high demand or suffering here in this supply chain breakdown are rare earth metals. These are things that you make smartphones with, the computer chips, stuff like that. The mining of rare earth metals and disposal of our highly digital technologies destroys human habitats, replacing them with toxic waste dumps, which are then picked over by peasant children and their families who sell usable materials back to the manufacturers. Interesting. This out of sight, out of mind externalization of poverty and poison doesn't go away just because we've covered our eyes with virtual reality goggles and immersed ourselves in an alternate reality. If anything, the longer we ignore the social, economic, and environmental repercussions, the more of a problem they become. This, in turn, motivates even more withdrawal, more isolationism, and apocalyptic fantasy. In other words, these people who are in power, listen, they're horrified. They're afraid. Listen, folks, God is sovereign. God is real. He exists. He's there. He has spoken to us. And we know how this goes. At the brightness of his coming, these people will fall under the rocks. They will do all they can to be protected from it. But in that day, they will understand that Jesus is King. Christ is the Lord. And he is sovereign in that day. But for now, they're still trying to put that day off. They know it's coming. The cycle feeds itself. The more committed we are to this view of the world, the more we come to see human beings as the problem and technology as the solution. I want you to pay attention to that sentence. The more we are committed to this view. What is this view? That technology is the way to extend our life, to save our planet, to make us eternal. The more committed we are to this view of the world, the more we come to see human beings as the problem and the technology as the solution. Why are human beings the problem? Because the self has been deified. If I am the most important thing in my world, then other people become a threat to me. That's what that thinking does. The very essence of what it means to be human is treated less as a feature than a bug. No matter their embedded biases, technologies are declared neutral. Any bad behaviors they induce in us are just a reflection of our own corrupted core. It's as if some innate human savagery is to blame for our troubles, just as the inefficiency of a local taxi market can be solved with an app that bankrupts human drivers. The vexing inconsistencies of the human psyche can be corrected with a digital or genetic upgrade. Right? Ultimately, according to the techno-solutionist orthodoxy, their ideology, their religious movement, the human future climaxes by uploading our consciousness to a computer, or perhaps better, accepting that technology itself is our evolutionary successor. Like members of a Gnostic cult, we long to enter the next transcendent phase of our development, shedding our bodies and leaving them behind along with our sins and troubles. You're dealing with a religion here, folks. Never forget that. They'll look at us and tell us how barbaric and simple-minded you are with your religion. They have their own religion. Our movies and television shows play out fantasies for us. Zombie shows depict post-apocalypse where people are no better than the undead and seem to know it. Worse, these shows invite viewers to imagine the future as a zero-sum battle between the remaining humans, where one group's survival is dependent on another one's demise. Even Westworld, based on a science fiction novel where robots run amok, ended its second season with the ultimate reveal. Human beings are simpler and more predictable than the artificial intelligences we create. The robots learn that each of us can be reduced to just a few lines of code, and that we're incapable of making any willful choices. Heck, even the robots in that show want to escape the confines of their bodies and spend the rest of their lives in a computer simulation. The mental gymnastics required for such a profound role reversal between humans and machines all depend on the underlying assumption that humans suck. And man, is that not the message we get from the world today? This is all your fault. You're diseased. Get out of my town if you're not going to come, if you're not going to be masked or shot or whatever. You're killing the earth. You're destroying the planet. We have to shut you down, lock you down to save the planet. Thus, we get tech billionaires launching electric cars into space as if this symbolizes something more than one billionaire's capacity for corporate promotion. And if a few people do reach escape velocity and somehow survive in a bubble on Mars, despite our inability to maintain such a bubble even here on Earth in either of two multi-billion-dollar biosphere trials, the result will be less a continuation of the human diaspora than a lifeboat for the elite. The Breakaway Civilization. He goes on to say, when the hedge funders asked me the best way to maintain authority over their security forces after the event, I suggested that their best bet would be to treat those people really well now. They should be engaging with their security staffs as if that. Isn't it interesting that these people didn't, they couldn't think of that? They had to be told that. The Christian worldview answers all of these questions, but of course, the world has rejected reason. The world has rejected the source of reason. They've rejected God. It says they should be engaging with their security staffs as if they were members of their own family. What is that? Treat them as you would want to be treated. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. He says, and the more they can expand this ethos of inclusivity to the rest of their business practices, supply chain management, sustainability efforts, and wealth distribution, the less chance there will be of the event in the first place. All this technological wizardry could be applied toward less romantic but entirely more collective interests right now. They were amused with his optimism, but they didn't really buy it. They were not interested in how to avoid a calamity. They're convinced we're too far gone. The calamity is going to happen. For all their wealth, and now maybe they're convinced because they know it's going to happen because it's going to be fomented. Perhaps that's true. For all their wealth and power, they don't believe they can affect the future. They're simply accepting the darkest of all scenarios and then bringing whatever money and technology they can employ to insulate themselves, especially if they can't get a seat on the rocket to Mars. Luckily, those of us without the funding to consider disowning our own humanity have much better options available to us. We don't have to use technology in such antisocial, atomizing ways. We can become the individual consumers and profiles that our devices and platforms want us to be, or we can remember that the truly evolved human doesn't go it alone. And this is why I've been pressing on you, the viewer, for a while now. If you're a Christian, you can't be a Lone Ranger Christian now. You need your brothers and sisters. You need your community more than ever. And as the days go on, you're going to need them more and more. Don't waste any more time. Get involved with a local body of believers or create one yourself. Being human is not about individual survival or escape, this author says. He says it's a team sport, community. Whatever future humans have, it will be had together. And so he goes on here with this interesting piece called The Misguided Idiot's Quest for Immortality. And this is talking about the transhumanist movement being made up of people of various political leanings. It's not a political issue. It is a power issue. It's the people who have the power. They're seeking the transhumanism. There are those who skew left of center, those with the more libertarian mindset, and there are even some who are archly conservative, but they all share a belief that science and technology can be used to cheat death. All right. What do you think about that? So we've dealt with transhumanism here over and over. So there's not much for us to say about that at this point. It's a dubious technological attempt at dodging death, uploading your consciousness into the machine. This concept is just the plot of transcendence. It already exists. Your consciousness will already be uploaded at death. Which way is it going to go? Is it going to go back to the Creator? Or is it going to go into eternal torment? Now, you can deny that that's the truth all you want, but it's funny how when people find themselves on their deathbed, they seem to entertain this truth. A major proponent of brain uploading is transhumanist luminary Martine Rothblatt, the founder of Sirius XM satellite radio, and the highest paid female CEO in the country, who's not female. This is a transgender man, I believe. Anyway, when the time comes, Rothblatt would like to upload her wife, Bina, to the cloud, a project that is already underway with Bina 48, a social robot that has Bina's personality and her own Twitter account. You see how twisted? Listen, it is sad. It is sad. Remember, and this person here, the founder of Sirius XM, or Sirius and then XM came together. Now there's Sirius XM satellite radio. That when the self is deified, when the self when your identity becomes the God of your life, well, your body might become an obstacle. And that's what's, in this case. So the body is the obstacle to these people. This is Gnosticism. This is the neo-Gnosticism. It's one of the earliest Christian heresies was, that the flesh is mundane. It's profane, that the flesh is profane. Interesting, huh? So let's see where we are in our day here. Yeah, we've come to the end of another one, folks. We don't want to go any farther than this. I have other things. The Davos Revolution and the Remaking of Civilization articles. Also, piece here, that the eugenics is alive and well on the planet. We don't need to make those cases anymore here today. We've covered the stories we wanted to cover here today. I do appreciate you folks joining us today. I do have some... Let me check out if you guys had any questions. Super chat donations, thank you. Human Error donating £5. Big Ned, $10 super chat. Thank you, brother. We appreciate your support. We do need your support. We're trying to be funded for 2022, and we just can't do it without you. We need your prayers. Crystal has a comment here from the chat. There's a futuristic city that will be a test bed for robots and autonomous cars. It's an artificial intelligence-based city. Toyota is building in Japan on an island. It's supposed to have an artificial intelligence-based health. It's supposed to have artificially intelligence-based health, robotic cars, etc. The city will let its residents and researchers experience the technologies of tomorrow, today. Here's a link we can throw up there for you right quick. Here's the link we received. This one from February of this year. Futuristic city will be a test bed for robots and autonomous cars. So, let's try these things out. And take a look at that article. See what we can find for it. Eddie Vasquez says, saw a post from CNN that a gang in Haiti has, I saw that, had kidnapped or killed some Canadian missionaries. And a lot of the comments are from people cheering on the terrorists. What are we supposed to do with that? What are we supposed to do with that? Observe what the human condition is. Fallen, sinful, rejected God. Romans chapter 1 and 2, just read through there. Tells you why. What are we supposed to do with that? We keep carrying the gospel. It's the gospel that's the power. Now what missionaries these were, we don't know. We don't know are these actual Christian missionaries or not. It doesn't matter. There are other image bearers of God, and to see them kidnapped and or murdered. I'm not sure about the story in general, but it's tragic, it's terrible. But this is the state of humanity. This is who we are. We're not basically good. That is the humanist version of reality, that people are just basically good. That doesn't work. Catherine Hamlin reports here that all telephone and computer gear have been taken off the shelves in Corsica, Italy. So as you can see, once again, the rare earth technology. China produces a lot of rare earth materials, things that are used to make chips, things that go into computers and devices like that. So let's jump back over here. And so that's something we'll see for sure. If China is in fact squeezing the world, or China's being used by those breakaways to squeeze the world. They're playing it like a chessboard, folks. At this point, they can. And it seems like they do. All right, so we're up to almost 100 votes here in the poll. Once again, folks, it's linked in the live chat if you'd like to. What shortages are you experiencing in your area right now? Well, we've got almost 100 votes, and 65% of you say experiencing none of these. Food shortages, gas shortages, paper products, and toilet tissue. Only 3% of you have said I'm experiencing all of the above. Of those of you who are experiencing some shortages, seems to be food. 23% of you say food is the shortage you're seeing the most of. But 65% of you reporting that, no, I'm not seeing any of these shortages right now. I believe that will probably change over the next few weeks. It is advisable to get some dry goods, get some things that can last for a while. It's just smart. You may not ever have to use them. Let's pray we don't have to use them. But it's not wise to sit back and say, that'll never happen. Dento Bean says, no shortages on anything I can live without, but I haven't been to the store in 2 weeks. Price goes up every time I go. Anna P says, I quit shopping big box stores after a trip to Wally World, noticing that they're purposely not stocking shelves in an effort to patronize and shop smaller stores like IGA. I've noticed that they're fully stocked always. I'd rather pay more to support small businesses than any big chain government controlled company anyway. It's another good idea. Support the people, support the businesses around you who are locally owned, and that's always been the best way. It costs us a little more money, but it pays off for us in the end. How much longer can we do that, though? I don't know. The squeeze is on. The supply chain squeeze is another way to force out, obviously, everything that's happened over since late 2019 has been to institute, to set the stage for this great reset. And to get the great reset, you got to get rid of people owning businesses, regular people, because we're going to be merging government with business. It's all going to be the same, so you can't have those in this new order. So, of course, pandemic, shutdowns, let's just pay people not to go to work. and now let's squeeze the supply chain. It's all for the same outcome. Going to limit your ability to own anything. Kenny says, I run a store and do all the inventory for it. Before COVID, I'd be out of maybe 200 items weekly. We average about 1,000 now. It's been as high as 2,000 items out of stock. The store maybe carries 20,000 items total. During the original toilet paper shortage, we came close to running out. We ran out of canned pet food once before. We've been slim on frozen cooler items, very slim. We probably do 1,500 price increases every month. The average is about 10% increase, but plenty of items go up 20% almost. Seen nothing like it before. Overall, though, it's business as usual. We're out of so many products, but my shelves don't look bad. I've seen stores that look very bare, though. Maybe it will get worse for my store, but it's been okay. As for gas, I need to put petroleum in it, and it's I need to put premium in it. And it's $4.29 a gallon, which is rough, but I've never seen a shortage here. Hope everything is okay for everyone else out there. Thanks for that report, Kenny. That's important. You know, Nana P and Kenny, clearly small business owners here that we're hearing from, and that's important. Mama G, our insider in the medical industry, says, I haven't been to the grocery store at Meijer, Walmart, or Costco in the last 3 months, so I can't answer that poll question at this time. Plan to do a run for supplies this week. I'll update you again. I appreciate that. I hope you do. Let us know what's going on, and let us know. Keep us updated on your efforts to stand strong against the kind of tyranny that wants to make it difficult for you to work at your most crucial job, caring for those who are ill. Keep us updated on that. All things made new, Jeremiah Fairweather says, gas prices have spiked over here on the East Coast. Michael Teza says there are games being played with insect grout, buckets of glue, and remodeling products in general. Interesting. Crystal Goins says, I've noticed at the local Walmart, they have run low on lots of stuff. Steak, hamburger, chicken, toilet paper, cleaning supplies to name a few, but other stores like Winco, Fred Meyer, and Safeway seem to be fine. The only time I saw real shortages was at the beginning of the pandemic, when for some odd reason everyone thought they needed 50 rolls of toilet paper per person. My husband said his coworker actually saw a full-grown man punch a kid in the face and took the toilet paper. Yeah, that was going on back then for sure. We saw that. She says, wow, so sad. People got that worked up. We remained calm in our house and carried on as usual, and we never ran out. Miss Jackie Mendez and her Cat Winston joining us today says the only thing I've seen in certain supermarkets is some empty shelves, but when I ask them why, they tell me they're clearing out the shelves to put more stuff. It kind of makes no sense. Dilly Gill says wet dog food, only one low-grade type available, been like that for over a month. Trying to make sense of it all. Says I put none, but I remembered coins. So yes, coins. There's a good one. I forgot about that too. There appears to be a coin shortage. That can only be described as a way to start moving cash to the side. Susie Q says, I'm trying to find a turkey to freeze for Thanksgiving. Haven't found one yet. Nokai says, here in Norway, we have a shortage on aluminum, so we're low on energy drinks, stuff like that. Born Again Spirit says, I shop from my corner shop in London, not from big companies. Excellent. It's good to do. We have to. If we're going to, this is the way we survive. We stick together. This small shop is so small, but everything I need they provide. Only not so much variety of products, but that's also good for me, as I don't have to spend time to decide which one to buy. Isn't that right? That's a good point. We need to be more practical. She says less time consuming and good for small businesses. There's a petrol shortage for you Americans. That would be gasoline here. But this is done or planned intentionally. In reality, there isn't a petrol shortage, but lorry drivers, those would be delivery trucks for you Americans. There's a shortage of drivers who deliver the gas. Another created problem. Very little salary for this difficult job makes this job undesirable, and after Brexit, cheap European workers aren't available as widely as before. Julie Pachuli says, not really shortages, but prices are way up. Brandon Colaire says prices higher. Alchemistry says, I have seen shorts in timber supply. That seems to be another one we've heard rumors about. Timber supply shortages in my local Bunnings Hardware, and video of some food shortages, but the worst is still to come, in my opinion. Says, all right, Emma Peel says, paper products in general never consent to evil. Says, cat food is the only shortages I'm seeing. That is interesting, isn't it? All right, we'll make sure here. There's Big Ned. Thank you for the super chat, Big Ned. Big Ned says, everything looking good down here in Texas. That would be Seguin County, I remembered. Says, glory to God. Thank you, Jesus. HEB is fully stocked as of now. Praying that the Lord will continue to provide in Jesus' name. Hallelujah. Peace. Yeah, for sure. That's where your sustenance is going to come from always. Whether there's shortages or not, your sustenance is going to come from God. Always. 93 votes have come in today. That's pretty good. We almost made it to 100. There's 98 votes. Will we make it to 100 in the next couple minutes? Let's see. Do we have any more? More comments. Okay. Caught up on the comments. Well, there we go. There we go. I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope it's been enjoyable. I hope you got something from this. A little bit of a dive into things that are rabbit hole-like. I think a breakaway civilization, extremely plausible. Think about the people in power. If they have the ability to live out of sight from us, certainly they would. Whatever they would need to do, as we read from that piece a few moments ago, those who do have access to wealth and therefore power, they're only looking at how to keep their position of power. They're not looking at how to help humanity or save the planet, really. That's not what the agenda for the 21st century is about. And that's because all the stakeholders involved are people like this. They've put together a plan that they see can be implemented to secure their position of power by making us all equal in our austerity, equal in our scarcity, so that they can keep their position of power. Two classes. They're seeking for two classes, and that would be themselves and everyone else fighting for whatever they can find. All right, this is not a time to be on your own. Christians, brothers and sisters, this is the time to be with other believers. This is the time to find your church home, your group of believers. That's how we survive. It's how we exist. You're going to need community. Christians of the early church were our examples of how fellowship and community will be your best source of support, comfort, and safety for whatever it is, no doubt, that's coming. And you saw from the article there that these wealthy people are concerned of some kind of event, catastrophic, whether it is orchestrated or natural or whatever. Be ready for what is no doubt coming. Being with other believers, that's your best source of support, comfort, and safety. Do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you as though something strange were happening to you. You were told it would happen. Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ will be persecuted. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, and you will be hated by all for his name's sake. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. For it's better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. And even more than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that this produces endurance, forms us, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. There will be no circumstance that you cannot endure with joy. That was the promise that our Savior left us. You can endure it all and endure it with a heart of joy, because that's the Spirit he's given us. Let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me, said Jesus. For whoever would save his life would lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And for this we know the gate is narrow. The Christian message is not popular because it doesn't exalt the self, it exalts God. And for that reason the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So our work is before us, folks. You know, the only reason that we're in this world, the only reason that we're here in this world, it's not for us to have a good time. It's not for us to be prosperous. It's not for us to do anything but evangelize. It's for us to speak the truth of God, to take the gospel to all the creatures. That's why God has allowed us to be. That's why he's left us here. There's no other purpose we serve here. Everything else is secondary. If you exist on this planet, that is the purpose. So answer your high calling. There is no higher calling. God bless you, my friends. We'll join you here again on Thursday. If not before, for some reason, we never know what might happen. Thursday for our next study series. Come join us. Let's have a nice big audience for the study of John chapter 11, where Lazarus is raised from the dead. Jesus wept. How often did Jesus weep in Scripture? What did it mean when he did? What was he actually perplexed about? And what was that all about? Why was Lazarus resurrected? Or might even just say resuscitated, because he did have to die again. There we go. We got 100 votes in. I appreciate you guys answering to that poll. 100 votes in. 63% of you say not experiencing any of these things. 24% of you say food shortages are what you're seeing. And only 4% of you are saying food, gas, and paper products. So that's good news, but it's coming. It's coming. Be ready. We're not fear-mongering here. We're being practical. Being practical. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you here again next time.
Armor of Truth, live. Faith is resistance.
technology. I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth, live. Faith is resistance. I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.